Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Listen, before we get into the video this morning, I want to remind you that our very special three special for the month of November 2022, U.S. orders only. Okay, it's a fantastic special, going to save you really some serious money, almost $20. Okay. And so go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. Right up at the very top, got a beautiful banner put there by my fantastic webmaster, Mr. Alan Morton. Go there, click on the tab, order the books. You'll be glad you did. It will give you a wealth of information that you're not going to find much of anywhere else. Okay, want to get right into it? As I promised yesterday, I want to examine the concept that is found in Isaiah chapter 3 and verse 24, when, in describing the last days, day of the Lord, a time of famine, a time of the judgment of the people, a time in which seven women take hold of one man. By the way, it's no justification whatsoever for polygamy. As the Mormons used to use that passage back in the 19th century, they used to use this, well, seven women take hold of one man. They completely ignored the context. Totally ignored the context. The reason that seven women would take hold of one man is because the rest of the men died in the war. That's the context. So they were guilty of proof texting, just like so many other people have used it as proof texting. But that's a digression. Okay, now then. So Isaiah chapter 3, verse 24 said, "Your men shall fall by the edge of the sword in the war." You see, folks, this whole concept of the last days, day of the Lord as the war. Now, my dispensational friends are going to call that Armageddon. Okay, if that's what you want to call it. Doesn't matter. Armageddon is over. It's past. It's done. And guess what? God won. Any doubt about that? Anyway, I want to focus on this term, the war. Now remember, we are talking about the last days, day of the Lord. Point number one, as we have seen, it would be a time when men could run to the mountains, hide in the caves, cry to the rocks, fall on us. That cannot be talking about, absolutely cannot be talking about, an end of time, earth-burning event that is over in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. Can't be. You don't have time to run to the hills, climb in your Range Rover, and go to the hills if it's over in the twinkling of an eye. Just doesn't work. So, last days, day of the Lord, a time of famine, Isaiah 3, 1-2, a time of the judgment of Israel, a time of the war when Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword. Now, I want you to notice the perfect correspondence with Daniel chapter 9. Now, virtually no one, except those who claim that Daniel chapter 9 is not even a messianic prophecy, that's the, quote, liberal view, unquote. But all conservatives believe that Daniel 9 and the 70 weeks brings us to the time of Jesus. Well, what's the time of Jesus? The last days. Hebrews chapter 1, 1-2, God, who at sundry time and in divers manners spake in time past by to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, by whom he created all things. That's Hebrews chapter 1, 1-2. Peter, standing on the day of Pentecost, standing in the temple, said this, that is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. This is that which was foretold by the prophet Joel, saying, it shall come to pass in the last days. Now look, folks, it doesn't say this is beginning the last days. And it doesn't say the last days started at the cross. The last days started with John the Baptizer. I don't have time to go into that right now, but in my book, Elijah has already come, or Elijah has come, a solution to Romans 11:25-27. I vindicate that claim. But here's the point. The last days were present. They were present before Pentecost. They were present before the cross. That means the last days did not begin on Pentecost. Well, if the last days began before Pentecost, then the amillennial and postmillennial view about the definition of the last days is falsified. Pure and simple, it's wrong. So, Isaiah predicting the last days. Jesus came in the last days. He came before Pentecost. Therefore, the last days started before Pentecost. But that means the last days were the last days of the Old Covenant age of Israel. Because in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, made under the law, to redeem those who were under the law. He sent his Son to deal with the law and the curse of the law, which personified, if you please, the curse upon all flesh. Romans chapter 3. But Daniel 9 brings us to the last days. When Jesus said, "The time is fulfilled, the kingdom of heaven is drawn near," as F.F. Bruce points out in his little book, not very big, but in his little book entitled "The Time is Fulfilled," F.F. Bruce points out that the language there, the time, that's specifically the appointed time, the divinely appointed time, has drawn near. Greek present tense or perfect tense. And as F.F. Bruce points out, what Jesus was saying is a long anticipated, divinely appointed time foretold by the Old Testament prophets had now arrived. And he said that before Pentecost. And as F.F. Bruce points out, the most famous Old Testament prophecy giving a time frame for the arrival of the kingdom, well, you have Daniel chapter 2 and the 4 kingdoms. And you have Daniel chapter 9 and the 70 weeks. So here you have Daniel 9 bringing us up to the point of, or bringing us into the last days. What does Daniel have to say about the last days? Well, first of all, and I won't develop this any, I do in my book, 70 weeks are determined for the resurrection, but you have to understand that Daniel chapter 9 foretold the resurrection. It foretold the new heaven and new earth, the new creation, because it foretold the bringing in of everlasting righteousness, which Peter was looking for in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 13. According to his promise, we look for a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. What did Daniel predict? The arrival of everlasting righteousness. What is Peter anticipating after the cross, after the Pentecost? He was anticipating the arrival of the new heaven and the new earth wherein dwells righteousness. Now then, watch this. Daniel 9 brings us to the last days of Isaiah chapter 2 through 4. The last days in which the day of the Lord would come as a time of judgment on Israel. Oh, getting ahead of myself, as a time of judgment on Israel for shedding innocent blood. Hang on to that. Isaiah 4:4. And in that last days, day of the Lord, Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword. Now, Daniel chapter 9 brings us to the last days, and it brings us to the time of the judgment, Rosh Hashanah, because at the end of the 70 weeks, here's what we find. After the 62 weeks, which is technically after the 69 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off. Messiah was going to be cut off in the 70th week. But not for himself, not on his own behalf. And the people of the prince who is to come. Now watch this, folks. shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. Why? For killing the prince. Like Isaiah chapter 4, verse 4, Jerusalem was going to be destroyed because of her blood guilt. Shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, the end thereof. The end of what? Well, the 70th week. That's the countdown. You know, you have the beginning of the countdown from the going forth of the decree to rebuild and to restore Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, 69 weeks. And the end thereof, which is the end of Jerusalem and the temple as well, but it's likewise the end of the countdown of the 70 weeks. Watch, the temple and the city shall be destroyed. The end of it shall be with a flood until the end of what? The war. I wonder where Daniel got his concept of the war that was coming in the last days. The last days, day of the Lord. Now, let's not forget, folks. Let us not forget. Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Obadiah, and other Old Testament prophetic books foretold the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC at the hand of the Babylonians and described it as the destruction of heaven and earth, Jeremiah 4, 24 and following, and described it as the day of the Lord. Now, how can it do that? Because you see, the day of the Lord is simply not an earth-burning, time-ending event. Ezekiel chapter 13, verse 5 and following, is definitive on this, along with Amos 5 and a host of other passages. But nonetheless, the Lord said, the prophets of Israel are like foxes out in the field. They do not go into the city. They do not go up to the wall and prepare there the walls. Pardon me. I'm not going to stop the video. Sorry, this is real life. And prepare the walls for the day of the Lord. I mean, after all, once again, if the day of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending event, then what good would it do to even build a wall? I mean, after all, the earth's going to be burned up or renovated, and all the walls are going to be torn down, right? You don't need any walls in the new creation, right? According to the literalistic view. The day of the Lord of Isaiah is the time of the destruction of Jerusalem for shedding innocent blood. The 70th week, and that would be in the war when Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword. Daniel 9 is the day of the Lord, the time of the judgment on Jerusalem for shedding the blood of Messiah in the war. Isaiah chapter 3, last day's day of the Lord, judgment of Israel. Israel's men fall by the edge of the sword. And that would happen because of Israel's shedding of innocent blood. Daniel 9, the 70th week, the war. Judgment on Jerusalem for shedding the blood of Messiah. The end of the 70 weeks would come with an overwhelming flood in the war. Isaiah 3, the war. Daniel 9, the war. And folks, there is no justification whatsoever for taking Isaiah 3, or 2 through 4, or Daniel 9 beyond AD 70. The war of Isaiah, the war of Daniel 9 was in AD 70. And we got more on this. So I'll see you on the flip side.